We're going to continue on the theme of big ideas and what's next to catalyze the sharing economy. And up first, we're going to spend the next few minutes in conversation with one of the pioneers of the sharing economy, Nate Blecharczyk. Welcome him to the stage with me. So Nate is the CTO and co-founder of Airbnb, and we're really excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind starting with the Airbnb story. I know there's something about cereal boxes and these other two co-founders, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective. And then also specifically, how did you sort of change the psychology of this being a very weird thing to do?
Yeah, so I grew up in Boston and went to school there. And kind of, I was an entrepreneur from a young age. And my background is software engineering. And so eventually I learned about Silicon Valley. And on very short notice, I moved out here with, say, 2 weeks' notice. And of course, I needed a place to stay. So I went on to Craigslist, because that's where you go, and found an apartment that was being offered by Joe Gebbia, my co-founder. And so we were roommates before there ever was an Airbnb. And what happened about 5 months later was that the rent on the apartment was raised 25%. And I said, forget that, I'm moving out. And so did the other roommate. But Joe wanted to stay. And Joe convinced Brian to move up from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Brian hadn't asked how much the rent was either. And so Brian, having just quit his job, found out that the rent was $1,150, and he had $1,000 in the bank account. So they didn't have enough money to pay the rent. But they're both designers, and they saw that a design conference was coming to San Francisco the following weekend. And they saw that all the hotels were sold out. And so they had this idea to rent out that extra room to designers who needed a place to stay. Now, that room was empty, but Joe had some air beds in the closet that he inflated. And instead of calling it a bed and breakfast, they called it an air bed and breakfast, which is where the name today comes from, Airbnb. And they were expecting guys like themselves to want to stay with them. And instead, there were 3 very different individuals. There's a 35-year-old woman from Boston, a father of 4 from Utah, and a man from India. So super diverse, kind of broke their assumptions. And that weekend, they made over $1,000. They all went to the conference together. Joe and Brian showed them around San Francisco, so much so that the woman ended up wanting to come back and move from Boston to San Francisco 6 months later. The man from India invited Joe and Brian to his wedding 2 years later. So some real friendships are formed. And it was a few months later, upon reflecting on this, that we said, wow, this is really powerful. Not only did we solve a hard problem for us, which was that we needed money for the apartment, but these people got an incredible view of San Francisco. Something special was created. And we thought, couldn't we do this for other people in other situations? And that's what we set out to do in early 2008. But of course, anyone we told this to thought we were crazy. I remember we approached one of our early mentors, someone we respected, and told them the idea. Someone not in the Bay Area, but nonetheless, someone we really respected. And he said, I hope that's not the only thing you're working on, right? That was his response. And that first year, we approached VCs, and no one would give us money. They all thought, who's going to do this? Certainly, I wouldn't do this. This sounds like a niche idea at best. Isn't someone going to get hurt? Even my dad, I think, for the first 3 years, thought it was a crazy idea.
Does he stay in Airbnbs now?
He still has not stayed in an Airbnb.
Oh, Dad, come on.
I mean, but to be fair, they never travel anyways. So that's part of the issue. So yeah, that first year was really hard. But we knew that we had experienced something firsthand that was powerful, something that was fundamental and that we believed could be recreated. And so that's why we persisted.
That's great. So it's been 5 years now, right? So what's actually been...
I think 6 years now.
6? Wow.
Yeah, 2008.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you.
What's actually been the hardest moment? Startups are hard. Building a company is hard. What's been the hardest moment for you personally? And then conversely, when did you know that it was actually going to work?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest moments were definitely during the first year. And I think for a variety of reasons. Financially, we were not funded. We weren't making any money. We had quit our jobs. So we were basically paying for the company using credit cards. Meanwhile, month after month was going by. Other opportunities were presenting themselves. As an engineer, I had a bunch of other ideas that I was also excited about. There were job opportunities. And then life just kind of happens too, right? So although we had all started in here in San Francisco, halfway through that year in May, I decided to move back to Boston because my longtime girlfriend, now wife, it was time to figure out where that was going. So I went back to Boston to be with her for a few months. And so the team was like drifting apart. Financially, we were hard pressed. And we were having the conversation, when should we quit? The team was about to fall apart. And that's when we enrolled in Y Combinator as almost a last-ditch effort, which we realized before we can quit, we have to give it 100%. And because we had been in separate places geographically, because there had been other things on the side, we said, if we do Y Combinator, it's only 13 weeks. We can be incredibly focused. And at the end of that, then we can ask that question. And if we say we're going to quit, we can feel good about it. Now, luckily, we never had to have that conversation. And so that's when we, I guess, knew that this was bound to take off. And over those 13 weeks, we went from basically having made $200 a week for the last 5 months, and despite all our effort, not being able to move the needle, to, at the end of 13 weeks, making $4,500 a week. And just to play that out, like by August, making $15,000 a week in fees. So we knew, we could feel the impact of our work. We could see that we were on that trajectory, that classic hockey stick growth. And people were beginning to understand the value proposition and telling friends, and new people were signing up. That organic growth engine was starting.
What's next for Airbnb?
The hard thing is there's so much opportunity, and I think we have to be very careful to just say one thing at a time. That being said, we do want to move beyond just the accommodation. I mean, we think that our customer is going on a trip. That's what matters to them. The accommodation is an important piece of it. They've trusted us to provide them the accommodation, so we've built some relationship. We have the payment information on file. We know a lot of details about them and their dates. So what other value can we provide during the trip? And how can we crowdsource information, knowledge from both our past guests and from our host community that's so engaged, and package that up into something and deliver it through, say, mobile. And since everyone has their phone on them, it's just a more convenient way to gain access. And how can we, Airbnb is not by any means a perfect substitute for a hotel, right? Like Airbnb excels at certain things, so do hotels. There's a lot of gaps in what we currently offer. So how can we offer innovative solutions to some of those gaps? And whether we deliver that through mobile and crowdsource stuff from our community, or partner with other startups. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity there. And hopefully you'll see some of that in the future.
That's great. So this conference has really been about sort of the sharing economy movement. We've explored the contours of that movement, everything from the future of work to the environmental impact, to affordable housing, to the economic impact of the sharing economy, from community startups to big tech platforms. How do you see Airbnb situated inside that movement and its sort of role?
Yeah, hopefully as one of the largest examples of a sharing economy company, we can use that position to help people to think differently about the opportunity. I mean, we think big every day, but that's what innovators and entrepreneurs are good at. Your average citizen or policymaker isn't trying to necessarily think big about all the possibility. And so how can we use our scale to convey that point? Maybe we can even take a few bullets in the process so that someone else later doesn't have to. And I think a lot of what we are trying to do, would like to do, is build bridges. There's a lot of stakeholders in the traditional economy, let's call it. And how can we build a relationship and understand how they can work with the sharing economy to benefit? Because I actually do think there's some real benefits there. And so some of the obvious things that we've done so far, is things like the economic impact studies, right? Because people don't anticipate how powerful this can be for neighborhoods by channeling tourism dollars into neighborhoods where tourists don't normally go, and having those dollars be used to pay the mortgages of families or to be spent at local small businesses is actually a really powerful thing, is that when cities hear that, they get quite interested. But that's not like what immediately comes to mind when you think Airbnb, at least historically. There's also some really good concerns that these constituents, these different stakeholders have. And how can we partner with them to come up with creative solutions rather than just saying no? Because I think that's what we experienced in 2008. I mean, everyone just told us, no, that's not going to work. We hope you have a better idea. But we really do believe that there are good ideas out there, and we would love to partner with the different groups to explore those and make them a reality. Taxes is a great example of that. Frankly, short-term rentals have been going on forever. A lot of them have happened on Craigslist historically. Craigslist is, of course, completely unregulated, and there's no visibility into what happens there. And so when you think about what is responsible policy and how do you tax something like that, it's just frankly not possible when it's on Craigslist. If you bring it out of the darkness and into the light and you put some structure around it, a lot of things do become possible. And we'd love to partner with the different groups to make that happen.
And in what cities are you getting some of the most traction from that perspective?
Yeah, surprisingly, we've made a lot of progress in Europe. Even though we started here, we've seen Europe actually really leaning in. So last year, Hamburg changed a law to promote sharing in the accommodation space, a very friendly law. Amsterdam did a complete 180. So I think at the beginning of 2013, there were some headlines saying that they were going to crack down, and they were nervous about what they were seeing. And then they looked at the economic impact study, they dug a little deeper, and they did a complete 180 and published a memorandum saying, indeed, this is actually something we think is good for Amsterdam, and they officially endorsed it on their website. A national law was passed in France just a few months ago that is very friendly to sharing of space. And in the States, we're having good conversations with Portland. So we've published to help communicate these ideas, we've published a template, and we're calling it the Shared City Initiative. And it's basically our vision for how we like to work with cities. And we basically put that up on our website, and we said, if you're interested, please reach out. We'd love to partner to flesh out the specifics. And so Portland is our initial signer of that.
Do you have some of the highlights of that?
Yeah.
So be able to pull it into the light means, pay taxes,
right.
Determine what's the right behavior on Airbnb.
So the obvious one is tax, but safety. What should be some reasonable expectations around safety? What about neighbor concerns? So one of the proposed solutions is having a neighborhood hotline, because we thrive on data. So we want the input of neighbors and anybody else. If someone thinks something isn't right, something's happening that's not right, we want to know that so we can regulate the marketplace. That's part of what we do. There's the disaster relief program, where we've partnered, for example, with San Francisco, saying that if there's an earthquake or some other kind of disaster, within 30 minutes, we can publish a notice to all our hosts and invite them to offer up their homes to house people, something that worked quite successfully during Hurricane Sandy in New York, where within 24 hours, about 1,500 people opened up their homes for free. Yeah. And hundreds of people actually took advantage of that.
Yeah, well, that's been something we've talked about at this conference a few times, and I think the sharing economy across the board will be in an interesting position come the next big, disaster.
Yeah, I think and that's a great example of how there can be some surprising use cases. I'm always amazed when people tell me their story, and I'm like, tell me how Airbnb has impacted you. And they tell me these incredible stories that were certainly not what I anticipated when we started this company, right? We were solving a very practical problem, and then you see how it has impacted people and bootstrapped new businesses and made people more confident, created friendships, marriages, all sorts of things.
Yeah. So you're the guy in charge of product One of the questions I'd love to just hear is, over the years, what are some of the changes that you've made to the product that have surprised you? Speaking of surprises.
Yeah. So we've done so much, and yet, so some of the core things were there from the beginning. Payments, reviews, search. This is like the core that is fairly timeless. I think a lot of the innovation that has come later is both on the product side and on just the service side. So doing a better job of offering customer support 24/7 in all the languages. The host guarantee has been another really big one that has addressed a real concern. Mobile has probably been one of the most important shifts for us because when our hosts are on mobile, what we're doing is we're bridging like the online world and the offline world, right? We have this website, this software, and we're trying to get people in the offline world to have these interactions. And the tighter we can integrate those two worlds, the better it works. And so with mobile, it allows us to do that. When our hosts get the notifications immediately and respond immediately, that provides a better experience for all our guests, regardless of whether they're on mobile. So I think mobile further removes the friction from the marketplace and accelerates the whole effect. So that's been one of the biggest things. Another thing that's kind of cropped up as we've gotten bigger with scale is like the paradox of choice, right? You do a search in New York or Paris, and you get back over 20,000 results. It's a lot to choose from. And it's not particularly structured because we don't have the concept of a 5-star, 4-star kind of experience. You have to dig a little bit deeper to understand what you're getting. And so we've tried to do a lot, or we're thinking about doing a lot around personalization, understanding specific use cases. So if we understand you want something last minute, that's going to be a different subset of our inventory than if you want something further out. Understanding the kind of trip that you want to go on. Is this a business trip? Is it a family getaway, a romantic getaway? I mean, this can all help us to surface the right inventory. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a matchmaker between guests and hosts. And so the more we can remove the friction from that process and do it faster, I think the more people will adopt this. I mean, that probably is one of the only limiting factors here.
Interesting. So my last question for you is just, there's some really exciting startups in the room, both in businesses and organizations that I know I've heard of just in the hall conversations. So what's your advice for entrepreneurs who are building the next big marketplace or sharing economy organization?
Just be a user every day and talk to users every day. I think that's super important. I mean, Airbnb was born out of our own use case. And then when things really started to take off, it was because we went to New York and we met every single user. I mean, we frankly videoed our users using our website to try to draw insights from where were they getting stuck. And even today, like at our scale, we put a real premium on that. So we give our employees travel vouchers every quarter that they have to use during that quarter so that they're constantly using the product. A lot of our employees are hosts. But frankly, we just can't get out into the field enough. So I would just say, maybe travel around, meet your users, stay on an Airbnb. And that is probably the most important way you're going to learn and iterate.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.